The fence at the back of the small backyard is the colour of old paper. Sun-blasted clapboard, parched lawn brittle as straw, food bills on the kitchen counter climbing every quarter, and an ageing gardener whose knees have stopped wanting to kneel. Most people look at that fence and see only a boundary. They mow the strip beside it, kneel into the same flat row of beans, and call it a garden. But the rural elders who once fed entire households off a single fence line have known something for centuries that changes everything. In almost every case, the back fence is not a wall. It is simply a vertical bed waiting for the right vine. Inside a single growing season, plain wood and string can hold a hanging pantry that feeds the kitchen at chest height. 12 of them, to be exact. 12 climbing vegetables that university trial gardens have quietly catalogued for decades, that Amish kitchen gardens and Wampanoag villages grew long before tractors, and that the modern seed catalogue will not put on its front cover, because there is no patent in a vine that comes back from its own roots. There is no shelf space in a groundnut tuber. This is the story of those 12, what each one does on a fence, why each one outpaces the lawn and garden aisle, and the mistake nearly every backyard gardener makes when reaching for the seed packet that the catalogue cover is selling. First, the leaf that refuses to surrender to summer. What does the gardener whose lettuce bolted by Memorial Day and whose chard turned bitter by July do for greens through August? The supermarket aisle says nothing. The forgotten vine says, climb. It is called Malabar spinach, and it is not spinach at all. Inside its thick, almost rubbery leaves, mucilaginous polysaccharides similar to okra, vitamin A that rivals kale, calcium, folate, iron, and a soluble fibre that thickens broth on contact and steadies the gut the way slow oats steady a winter morning. The mucilage in Malabar leaves is the same family of soothing fibre that traditional Ayurvedic kitchens have used for centuries to calm inflamed digestion, long before any Western journal coined the word anti-inflammatory. Heat does not break this leaf, it feeds it. Where lettuce flowers and turns bitter at 80 degrees, Malabar pushes new growth at 90, 95, 100. Its waxy cuticle holds moisture against the sun. The hotter the fence, the faster the wall fills in. The common mistake is planting it in April with the lettuce. The seed sits dormant for 6 weeks. The gardener pulls it, blames the seed packet. The seed is not the problem. The soil is too cold. Malabar does nothing until the ground reaches 70 degrees, and once it does, a single vine can climb 10 feet by August. And here is the pivot. The dropped leaves and pruned stems return more biomass to the soil beneath the trellis than any annual leafy green grown in North America. The vine feeds the wall it climbs. 2 seeds soaked overnight. Planted 1 inch deep, 6 inches apart, after last frost, against a south-facing fence with a single drip line at the base. Pinch a leaf between thumb and forefinger. A thread of clear sap draws out, thicker than ochre slime, thinner than aloe, glossy as wet glass. That thread is the verification signal. From soil warm to first leaf, 35 days. From first leaf to a chest-high green wall, 90 days. While the lettuce row has been pulled and forgotten. Picture the backyard at the end of August. The lawn is brittle. The neighbour's tomato bed has surrendered to blight, and against the sun-facing fence, the gardener stands at chest height, plucking glossy leaves from a vine that did not exist in May. The salad bowl is full, the knees never bent. The gardener who has buried 3 failed lettuce rows in 3 Julys can grow this leaf. It rewards the patient one. Walk down any seed catalogue aisle. Spinach packets, lettuce blends, mesclun mixes, every one of them dies in the heat the gardener actually has. Malabar is rarely on the front cover, almost never in the front yard nursery. The seed industry sells volume, and volume favours crops that fail and need replanting. A vine that comes back from its own seed is not a profitable crop. It is competition. But the next vine on this fence does not feed the salad bowl. It feeds the apothecary shelf. It is one of the oldest cultivated vines of Mesoamerica, written about by a Spanish friar in 1577, and the gardener who learns its rhythm will trade the vegetable bin for the medicine drawer. Second, the Aztec apothecary that climbs. Why does the homesteader, who has filed 3 prescription copays this month, walk past the same vine that fed an empire's healers? The supermarket calls it a tasteless squash. The Aztec midwife called it medicine. It is chayote, and the fruit that costs 60 cents at the grocer hides a 6-month yield from a single vine. Inside its pale green flesh, cucurbitacins, myricetin, vitamin C, dietary fiber, and traces of a flavonoid family that traditional Mesoamerican kitchens used for joint stiffness and high blood sugar long before the word diabetes was charted in a clinic. The Spanish friar Bernardino de Sahagún recorded chayote in the Florentine Codex of 1577, alongside the Aztec recipes for bone aches and fevered children, recipes the catalogue will not print. Heat does not stop this fruit. Cold does. Where summer squash collapses to vine borers in July, chayote runs through frost. A single-rooted vine in a tract backyard can throw 50 to 100 fruits between August and October, more than a 6-pack from the grocer 10 times over. The mistake nearly every gardener makes is treating chayote like a seed crop. There is no seed packet. The fruit is the seed. Buy 1 chayote at the grocer, set it on the counter until a green sprout pushes from the wide end. Then plant the whole fruit on its side, half buried, against a sunny fence. And here is the pivot. The vine drops a quiet rain of biomass under itself. Broad, heart-shaped leaves that shade the earth, slow evaporation, and feed the soil the way a forest feeds its floor. Medicine grew on a fence long before it grew in a bottle. Plant by Mother's Day. Train onto a cattle panel. Water deeply once a week. The verification signal is the leaf. A working chayote has leaves the colour of a green velvet curtain, undersides faintly fuzzy, stems thick enough to hold a sparrow. From planted fruit to first harvest, 90 days. By the first frost, a fence panel is hung with 100 pale fruits. The gardener, who has paid $80 a month at the pharmacy for inflammation, can pluck a chayote from the wall, slice it raw into a bowl, and eat what an Aztec healer would have served before the printing press existed. The pharmacy does not stock chayote. It cannot. There is no formula to patent in a fruit older than the calendar. The next vine on the fence is smaller than a thumb, and older. Third, the smallest fruit on the wall holds the longest memory. What does a Mexican farmer 8,000 feet above sea level eat for the trip down to market? The grocer has never heard of it. The Aztec child knew it by name. Cucamelon, sometimes called the mouse melon, sometimes the Mexican sour gherkin, a fruit the size of a thumb that looks like a watermelon shrunk to 1/10 its size. Inside its thin skin, cucurbitacin traces, vitamin K, polyphenols, and the cool, watery flesh that walking traders chewed for thirst on Andean and Mesoamerican mountain trails. Diego Rivera painted them. Pre-Columbian markets sold them. The seed catalogue forgot them. The vine is delicate as wire. The fruits hang like green earrings. Heat does not bother it. Drought does not stop it. The mistake is treating cucamelon like a cucumber and feeding it nitrogen. Heavy fertilizer makes leaves and no fruit. Lean soil, dry feet, and a string trellis make 100 fruits per vine. And here is the pivot. The cucamelon root, often pulled and discarded at season's end, can be lifted, stored in slightly damp sand through winter, and replanted in spring, a perennial in disguise that the catalogue sells once a year as a novelty annual. The smallest fruit on the wall holds the longest memory. Soak 2 seeds, plant after frost, train onto twine. The verification signal is the fruit itself. Pinch one between fingers. The skin gives the slightest crunch, like a pea pod fresh picked. Bite. The flavour is cucumber on the front of the tongue, a touch of citrus on the back. From planted seed to first fruit, 65 days. By August, the fence holds 300. The gardener who has spent a summer fighting cucumber beetles stands beside a vine that the beetles ignore. The next vine is the answer to half the food shortages of the 20th century, and the seed industry has never put it on a front cover. Fourth, the four-gift vine that the National Academy of Sciences begged the world to grow. What if a single plant on a single fence offered leaves, pods, flowers, and tubers, every part edible, every part nutritious, every part a different texture for a different night's dinner? The catalogue calls it exotic. The South Pacific Kitchen calls it dinner. It is the winged bean, Sophocarpus tetragonolobus. Inside the pod alone, protein levels that rival soybean, 16 to 28% dry weight in some cultivars, alongside vitamin A, iron, calcium, and the lysine that corn and rice cannot supply on their own. The leaves contain quercetin and chlorophyll concentrations comparable to spinach. The pale blue flowers, often discarded, hold thiamine and folate. The buried tubers, almost never harvested in the West, carry roughly 20% protein, 4 to 10 times the protein of a potato. The National Academy of Sciences published a report in 1981 titled "The Winged Bean, a High-Protein Crop for the Tropics," urging cultivation as a solution to global protein scarcity. Most catalogues still list it as ornamental. Now here is a point where much of the common gardening advice is simply wrong, and it is worth pausing on. The internet keeps repeating that winged bean is tropical only and will not produce in temperate zones. That is half true and half wrong. The vine wants short days to set tubers, but pods and leaves come in long day summers across most of the lower 48, provided the seed is started indoors 6 weeks before last frost. The mistake is buying seed in April and planting it directly outside. By the time the soil warms, the season is already half spent. And here is the pivot. The winged bean is a nitrogen fixer. Its roots host the same family of soil bacteria that build fertility under clover and alfalfa, returning 40 to 60 pounds of nitrogen per acre into the ground beneath the trellis, feeding the next year's tomato row. 3 things look like protein deficiency in the kitchen garden: yellowing in the chard row, slow growth in the tomato vine, weak flowering in the bean trellis. The first is nitrogen. The second is calcium. The third is the missing legume. Winged bean answers all 3. Start indoors in March. Transplant after frost into deeply mulched soil, 6 inches from a tall trellis. The pods are ready when the wings are an inch wide and snap clean. The leaves are ready anytime. The flowers, the pale blue verification signal, bloom from July through frost. The tubers come at season's end. From transplant to first pod, 90 days. From first pod to fence-wide cascade, 120 days. The homesteader on a fixed budget who watches every grocery dollar can grow protein, vitamins, and a soil-feeding cover crop on the same fence. The seed industry will not push winged bean because the seed industry sells separation: a leaf packet, a pod packet, a flower packet, a tuber packet, 4 catalogue lines, 4 price tags. A 4-gift vine collapses 4 product lines into one fence. The next vine has been on the back porch of an American president since 1799. Fifth, the eye-level vine that Thomas Jefferson trained at Monticello. Why does the gardener with arthritic hips bend to harvest beans at ankle height when a single climbing vine puts the entire crop at chest height? Because the catalogue never showed an alternative. It is hyacinth bean, Lablab purpureus, the deep purple podded vine that Thomas Jefferson grew at Monticello, documented in his garden book entries from 1799 onward. Inside the pod, protein, fibre, vitamin C and iron. The flowers, lavender and fragrant, hold their own table value. The mistake will hurt the homesteader who skips it. Hyacinth bean pods, like several traditional legumes, contain a class of compounds called cyanogenic glycosides when raw, and require thorough cooking, at least 15 minutes of boiling, before consumption. 3 things look like food poisoning from a poorly cooked legume: nausea after a raw bean snack, bloating from undercooked dried beans, and a faint headache after eating young pods that were merely steamed. Each is a different cooking time. None is a reason to avoid the plant. The Pennsylvania Dutch and the Carolinian gardeners cooked hyacinth bean for 2 centuries without harm. The recipe is plain. 8-foot poles, 2 seeds per pole, planted after the last frost. The verification signal is the flower. Lavender against the green leaf, fragrant from 12 feet away. From planted seed to first flower, 70 days. From flower to first cooked pod harvest, 90. The gardener who once knelt for green beans now stands at chest height, scissors in hand, lifting purple pods at eye level. The next vine grows pods longer than a forearm. 6th, the pod that outgrows the ruler. How long is a long bean? Long enough that one pod, laid across a kitchen counter, reaches from the sink to the toaster. The Yardlong bean, Vigna unguiculata sesquipedalis, throws pods 2 to 3 feet long that snap clean as garden beans and cook tender as French haricots. Inside the pod, protein, folate, vitamin C, manganese, and a thread of dietary fibre that holds satisfying weight in the stew pot. Asian kitchen gardens have grown Yardlong bean for 20 centuries. The American catalogue rarely stocks it because the American catalogue is built for hybrid sweet corn and bush beans. Heat does not stop this vine. Drought slows it but does not break it. The mistake is harvesting too late. Pods left to overmature turn fibrous, the way an overripe zucchini turns to wood. Pick when the pod is the diameter of a pencil, no thicker. The verification signal is the snap, clean, sharp, like a young carrot breaking. The setup is 1 tall pole, 4 seeds, 8-foot trellis, mulched base. From planted seed to first harvest, 60 days. From first harvest to fence cascade, 90. 8 pods will feed 4 people. A single trellis will feed a household for a season. The next vine fed the Inca terraces. 7th, the Andean stuffing cucumber the conquistadors carried home and the catalogue left behind. What did the Inca farmer eat off the terraces of the high Andes when the corn ran short? A chocha, Cyclanthera pedata, a cucumber cousin vine that throws hollow, pale green fruits the size of a small banana. Fruits the Inca stuffed with quinoa and meat the way a French cook stuffs a bell pepper. Inside the wall of the fruit, vitamin C, fibre, traces of cucurbitacin compounds traditionally used for cholesterol management in Andean folk medicine, and an empty cavity that takes a stuffing the way bread takes butter. The mistake is letting it go too long. Picked young, the wall is tender and sweet. Picked old, the seed cavity hardens and the wall toughens. Pick when the fruit is the length of a thumb to a hand. The setup is twine to a fence, 2 seeds per foot, planted after frost. The verification signal is the small white flower that opens at first light and closes by noon. From planted seed to first fruit, 75 days. From first fruit to harvest cascade, 90. The vine feeds the gardener and the soil in one motion, drops half its biomass at season's end into a bed that the next year's tomato will thank for. The next vine is immune to the bug that has killed every squash on the block. 8th, the Italian heirloom from Liguria that vine borers cannot kill. Why does the gardener who has lost 3 squash plants to vine borers in 3 Augusts plant a 4th from the same hybrid catalogue? Because the catalogue never told the gardener that an entirely different species exists. Cucurbita moscata, the species that holds Tromboncino, the long-necked Ligurian heirloom, has solid stems where common summer squash has hollow ones. The vine borer, which lays its eggs at the base and bores down a hollow stem to kill the plant, cannot make the same passage in a solid moscata stem. The plant survives. Inside the long pale green fruit, beta-carotene, vitamin C, fibre, potassium, and a flavour between zucchini and butternut, depending on harvest age. Picked at 12 inches, it is summer squash. Left to 36 inches and to maturity, it is winter squash. 1 vine, 2 crops, 1 fence. The mistake is buying the same hybrid summer squash packet the catalogue has advertised every May since the gardener was a child. That packet is the borer's preferred meal. Tromboncino seed sells for the same dollar and the same dime, but the lawn and garden chain rarely stocks it because hybrid F1 seed cannot save itself. Tromboncino, an open-pollinated heirloom, can. A gardener who saves seed once never buys squash seed again. The seed industry counts on the gardener forgetting that. From planted seed to first picked fruit, 60 days. From first fruit to mature winter squash, 100 days. The next vine was first grown for the flowers, and the kitchen forgot the tubers. 9th. The scarlet flower that hides a perennial pantry. Why does the British cottage garden grow scarlet runner bean for the flowers and not for the bean? Because the British cottage garden inherited the plant in 1766 as an ornamental, and the kitchen use memory was lost across an ocean. Phaseolus coccineus originated in the highlands of Mexico, where it was grown as a perennial food crop by the Tarahumara for centuries before the conquistadors. The bean is edible, the young pod is edible, and the buried tuber, almost never mentioned in modern catalogues, was a winter staple, dug like a sweet potato and stored in cool sand. Inside the tuber, starch, fibre, B vitamins, and a slow-burning energy that fueled work in cold mountain villages. The mistake is treating it like an annual. The vine is a perennial in zones 7 and warmer. The tubers, lifted and stored over winter, replant in spring as a tested vine, the way an asparagus crown replants. The flower is the verification signal, scarlet bright against the green leaf, drawing hummingbirds the way a bell draws a sparrow. The setup is 1 tall pole, 3 seeds after frost. From planted seed to first flower, 60 days. From first flower to fresh-eating pod, 80. From planting to lifted tuber, 150. The next vine builds soil while it builds dinner. 10th. The lima cousin that fixes the soil for the whole fence. What does a vine drop into the ground that the next year's tomato eats for free? Nitrogen. Phaseolus lunatus, the Madagascar bean, sometimes called the white Caigua, sometimes the gigantes, is a lima cousin that holds its own through heat and drought where common lima collapses. Inside the dried bean, protein, fibre, iron, magnesium, and the slow starch that a Greek shepherd has eaten for breakfast for 3,000 years. And under the soil, a root colony of rhizobium bacteria, converting 40 to 70 pounds of atmospheric nitrogen per acre into a form the next plant can drink. The mistake is pulling the vine at season's end and bagging the roots. The roots are the gift. Cut the vine at the soil line, leave the root mass to decompose in place, and the trellis bed will need no synthetic fertilizer for the following crop. Justus von Liebig, the German chemist who in 1840 mapped the law of the minimum and built the science of fertilizer, never finished his work on biological nitrogen. The synthetic fertilizer industry took the formula and the credit. The Madagascar bean was already doing the same work, for free, on a Cretan fence. From planted seed to first dry bean, 90 days. The next vine is medicine that climbs. 11th, the Andean flower that breathes for the lungs. What does the homesteader fighting a winter cough reach for when the supermarket cold and flu aisle costs $40? The catalogue will recommend a syrup. The Inca herbalist would have walked to the fence. Climbing nasturtium, Tropaeolum majus in its trailing forms, the same scarlet flower the colonial American garden grew for beauty, comes from the high Andes, where indigenous healers chewed the leaves for respiratory complaints and applied poultices to slow healing wounds. Inside the leaf, glucotropaeolin, a precursor that converts on chewing into benzyl isothiocyanate, the same family of mustard oil compounds used in traditional preparations for chest congestion. Vitamin C levels rival watercress. The peppery leaf, the spicy seed pod, and the bright orange flower are all edible. The mistake is feeding it heavy compost. Rich soil produces leaves and no flowers. Lean soil, dry feet, and a string trellis produce a wall of flame-orange blooms that hummingbirds find before the gardener does. The verification signal is the flower's long spur, a curved tube that holds a drop of sweet nectar. From planted seed to first bloom, 50 days. From first bloom to wall coverage, 90. The peppery seed pod, pickled in vinegar, becomes the homestead's caper jar, the dollar at the supermarket replaced by a fence. The next vine is older than the United States itself. 12th. The tuber that fed the first Thanksgiving. What did the Wampanoag dig from a fence-line vine in the winter of 1620 when the pilgrim corn ran out? Apios americana, the groundnut, the hopnis, a native North American climbing legume that produces a long string of protein-rich tubers under the soil, 20% protein on a dry weight basis, 3 times the protein of a potato, and was the staple winter carbohydrate of eastern woodland peoples for at least 3,000 years before European arrival. Henry David Thoreau wrote in Walden in 1854 of the groundnut as the potato of the Aborigines, a sort of fabulous fruit, noting it had been almost forgotten in his own lifetime. Inside the tuber, protein, calcium, iron, isoflavones similar to those in soy, and a starch that bakes, boils, or fries the way a small potato does. The mistake is impatience. The vine takes 2 seasons to set harvestable tubers. The first year, the vine climbs and stores. The second year, the soil yields a string of tubers like beads on a buried necklace. The Appalachian and Eastern woodland herbalists called the harvest method the digging of beads. A wooden trellis, 3 tubers planted 12 inches apart in spring, mulched deep. The verification signal is the late summer flower, a small maroon and cream bloom with the scent of violets at noon. The land remembers what the catalogue forgot. From planted tuber to first lifted bead, 240 days across 2 seasons. After year 2, every fall, the trellis bed yields 10 to 15 pounds of tubers from a single planting. The household that grows groundnut on a fence does not buy potatoes for 2 years. The Idaho russet monoculture, planted on 600,000 industrial acres, replaced a perennial fence vine that needed no tractor, no irrigation system, no nitrogen tank, no pesticide spray. The displacement was not because the russet was nutritionally superior. The russet had a shipping window, a storage warehouse, a fast food contract, and a national distribution chain. The groundnut had 3,000 years of history and no marketing department. The homesteader who plants groundnut on a back fence is doing what a Wampanoag grandmother did before the Mayflower anchored. The fence becomes a buried pantry. The pantry becomes a lineage. 12 vines. Malabar through summer, Chayote through fall, cucamelon as living jewellery, winged bean as the 4-gift protein, hyacinth bean at chest height, Yardlong bean by the foot, a chocha for the stuffing, Tromboncino for the borer-proof yield, Scarlet runner for the perennial tuber, Madagascar bean for the soil itself, climbing nasturtium for the cough, and groundnut for the long winter. Each one feeds, each one returns, each one climbs again. What climbs, feeds. What feeds, returns. What returns, climbs again. A wall of vines feeds twice, once at the table, once at the soil beneath. The household that builds this wall in a single growing season buys nothing from the catalogue the next, owes nothing to the lawn and garden chain, and bends nothing more than its wrist to harvest. Picture the fence at the end of October. The lawn is dormant, the hybrid tomato in the neighbour's bed is gone, and against the sun-facing wood, a green and purple cascade of 12 vines holds the household pantry. Leaves for salad, pods for stew, fruit for the counter, flour for the cup, tuber for the cellar, and the soil beneath fed by every leaf the vine ever dropped. The fence is no longer a wall. It is a wall that feeds. The gardener who has read this far knows something the front cover of the catalogue will never put in print. Drop a comment with the name of the first vine going on the fence this season. Malabar, Chayote, cucamelon, winged bean, hyacinth bean, Yardlong bean, Chayote, Tromboncino, Scarlet runner, Madagascar bean, climbing nasturtium, or groundnut. So the rest of the homestead community knows where to start. Send this list to the neighbour whose tomato bed surrendered to blight and whose knees no longer want to kneel. Every household that builds this wall feeds one fewer dollar into the lawn and garden chain. The fence is older than the catalogue. The vine is older than the seed packet. The grandmother who climbed it knew its name before the printing press did.